Good morning and welcome back to the Sustainable AI Conference. Welcome to those of you who are just joining us for the first time. This is the Sustainable AI Conference. We are here at the University of Bonn, specifically at the Institute for Science and Ethics. My name is Aimee van Wynsberghe. I am the Alexander von Humboldt Professor for Applied Ethics of Artificial Intelligence. We are continuing with paper session 6, and our next speaker is Federica Lucivero. I'm very excited to hear you talk, Federica. Good morning. Hello. Just a reminder to everyone who's joining us on the live stream or on the Zoom call, please feel free to ask questions at any time. You can type them into the box underneath the picture you see on your screen, and in the Zoom call, you type them into the chat function. So Feda, I give you the stage and the microphone. Please take it away.
Thank you very much, Aimee, and thank you so much for having me here. I have been actually talking about my work in the area that I broadly refer as digital sustainability for a couple of years now, and I always need to start breaking the news that big data, digital technologies, and AI have an environmental impact, and that we need to take it seriously. But so in the 4 years I've been interested in this area, I went from conversations where people were showing suspicions about the relevance of such impact as they maintain the faith that the technology would advance to a point that it would solve its own environmental impact. And I could sense a change. I could sense an evolution in the last year, especially, while I got very encouraging responses from audiences that felt that this was a very important problem that actually needs to be addressed. So this is the first time that I had to remove many slides explaining the environmental impacts of digital technology from my presentation, because I knew that they would be redundant or obvious for this audience. So it's the first time I'm talking to people like me, who has conducted work in this field for a bit. And this is at the same time exciting and frightening. And exciting because, of course, there's a huge opportunity for rich exchange and collaboration that I've seen, happening in these days, but also frightening because we are discussing real stuff here, which is great. So I could sense also other speakers probably share the same feelings. But anyways, thanks to the organizers of the conference as they brought us together. It is really great to get to, for me, I really feel like getting to a level of depth that I've been missing so far in other discussions I had to broader audiences. So that's great. So I'm a senior researcher in ethics and data at the Ethos Center and Wellcome Center for Ethics and Humanities. And we are part of the Department of Population Health at the University of Oxford, and we are located in the Big Data Institute. Well, at least we were before we got relocated in our garden offices. So as a philosopher, I've been working since 2012 on ethical issues related to the increasing digitalizations of healthcare and biomedical research, exploring, for example, the use of apps, electronic health records, and big data in clinical and research settings. And in doing this, I always adopted an empirical ethics approach. That means that I combine qualitative research methods and conceptual analysis to address normative questions. So I want to start giving you an idea of, because I feel that we are also kind of introducing each other. And as I said, like it's the very beginning of some, I think, like very interesting collaborations. So let me just give you an idea of the research and thought trajectory that brought me here today. So how did I move from the ethics of digital health to the ethics of digital sustainability? Right. I can't see my slides moving, although I'm clicking. Aimee, can you just tell me if they're moving? Can anyone tell me if my slides are moving, because I don't see them? Oh, here, yes, yeah. Great.
Okay.
Perfect. So if it doesn't work, I can also say next slide and somebody can help me from the technical team. So in 2016, I went to this exhibition in London called Big Data Bank, actually Big Bang Data, where artists and clinical designers explore the materiality of the big data revolution in their work. And I was very impressed by the reproductions of servers in data centers, as the one you see in the picture, that are at the core of any data storing, processing activities, or digital services. It's like an infrastructure also at the core of AI systems. And next slide, because it doesn't work. Sorry, now it works. Yes. Or for example, like these representations of the submarine cables that make the internet and data transmission possible. And what these images show is that the infrastructure that makes these digital services possible, that enable AI, that allow biobanks or other big data initiatives, they are materially embedded in the natural environment. And this is not new, as science and technology studies scholars, new materialism philosophers, sociologists have been highlighting this for a long time. Same for scholars working in ethics and philosophy of technology. Value-sensitive design approaches have always been showing the importance of the material, situated aspects of technologies when asking questions about their ethical acceptability. At the same time, what I found striking was that when I looked into the literature on the ethics of big data or AI, I found that the environmental embeddedness of these technologies was not really addressed. So, so what I could find was either a reference to sustainability as the capability of data structures and digital systems to be used through time, access beyond the duration of a single project, or, as I mentioned in the second point, the role of data, AI, and digital as a tool to achieve sustainable development goals across the three pillars that many of you have been talking about. So I'm not getting into here. So this was 2017, right? So the more I researched, though, and the more I learned that this environmental impact, or what some call digital pollution, was quite heavy and real. And what I mean with digital pollution is that the infrastructures that enable the use of digital services, data production, processing, and training of AI models have a relevant environmental impact throughout their lifestyle, due not only to CO2 emissions, for example, in the case of data centers, or we saw about like AI training models, but as Daniela was also pointing out before, also in terms of, environmental impacts are something like broader. It also involves the deployment of natural resources for manufacturing of the hardware that is, that is needed for these technologies, and the emissions of toxic substances during their disposal. So I was struck in a way by the lack of considerations for these issues, and especially because I was aware of the discussion in the digital health realm that I think Gabi Samuel discussed yesterday and like pointed out very nicely, because it was, like in the digital health, so we're all focused on the social value of these technologies. And I was striking that there was somehow that the fact that these very technologies negatively impact the environment was somehow ignored. And that in this way, they also have a negative impact on people's health. So my intuition was digital pollution is an ethical matter. And so I wrote a paper that came out in 2018 trying to argue this. More specifically, in this paper, I argued that the ethical and policy debate on big data needed to focus more on the material infrastructure that make big data possible, and explore the relationship between these material infrastructures and the environment. So I argued that this would help us uncovering the link between our use of digital services and the environmental impact of this use. So what I try to say is that moving away from metaphors like the cloud or the materiality of data would help would help to raise awareness of individual responsibilities in this realm. In the same way we made people aware of the links between our eating or waste disposal habits and the environmental crisis. So what I was saying is, if we start speaking also and talking differently and thinking differently about these devices and these services, and then we also become more aware that there is a link between what we do online and what happens in the environment. So I argue that this would help us in focusing, this like shift would help us in focusing on the fact that the digital revolution relies on natural resources that are limited. And when resources are limited, then we face issues of just distribution. So this requires decisions that are not made only at the individual level, but mostly at the political and policy level, and hopefully in a democratic way. So I argue that the environmental impacts of the data revolution must become more central on the agenda for a responsible governance of data initiatives, and that people working in the realm of ethics can play a fundamental role in this by addressing issues of responsibility and justice. So my agenda for an ethics or philosophy of data sustainability focuses on three types of questions, like empirical, epistemological, and normative. So first of all, we need to understand what is happening in the field, what like the different stakeholders, different experts are doing, and what are the motivating factors, what are the values that move them, and as some of you, like several of you actually have pointed out, what are the different concepts of sustainabilities that are used in this field and that motivate stakeholders in this field. And when I say this field, I mean the field of trying to address the ethical implications. So there is already a lot of work going on about how people understand their role, their mission. But then, of course, we also need to ask like epistemological question. And when I talk about them, I mean like the way knowledge is constructed, the way facts are constructed in this field. Again, like since the first day, we've been talking about all the uncertainties that there are, the lack of data, the difficulties in understanding indirect impacts and make sense and measure indirect impacts of these technologies, as well as the difficulties of measuring impacts throughout the life cycle of these technologies. So these are all questions about how we build facts and how we build knowledge. And in that sense, they are epistemological questions that is important to ask. It's like, how do we use then these facts? And finally, of course, there are normative questions that are ones I was talking about before that relate to questions of responsibility and justice, and what is a good, a legitimate way of addressing these issues. So this agenda guided several activities in this area, and I should say that this was mostly possible because I found in Gabby Samuel, who presented yesterday, a great collaborator, and together we conducted a scoping literature. We conducted a scoping literature search to identify relevant work linking issues of environmental sustainability and data, digital, and AI technologies. And we mostly found work done in computer science and engineering. Again, this was a couple of years ago. And based on this, we organized an expert workshop in May 2020 that was interdisciplinary. We had like computer scientists, energy policy anthropologists coming, and you can find more on this page that you see. I can send you the link afterwards. But other outcomes of the workshop were several. But the most important ones were that we were trying to create a network of interested people, and we are still working on it, so get in touch, please. Start a seminar series that will hopefully like start from next year, and collaborative and successively wrote to project proposal. One was the one that Gordon Blair coordinates, and he discussed 2 days ago, actually, the Paris D project. And the other one is a grant that Gabby and I received from the British Academy and Leverhulme to explore ethical challenges and opportunity for a sustainable digital revolution. And we're still working on it. But what I want to say, basically, both these projects are interdisciplinary, collaborative, and they involve several partners and stakeholders from the field, so not just academic. As Gordon talked about the Paris D, I just wanted to say a few words about the other one. Although we are still working on it, so I won't be discussing like funding much. But what I just give you a sense is that what we wanted to do was a bibliometric analysis showing research groups working. What we did actually is a bibliometric analysis showing research group working on issues related to the environmental implications of digital data and AI technology. And you can see on the right of my slide all the keywords that we used, and this, of course, like as you see, it's very broad. This produced like about 44,000 hits, and with the help of a research assistant, we manually selected the relevant ones and got up back to like 400. Then we used the software, like bibliometric software, to analyze them through and to show basically relationship between authors and institutions and topics. We're still working on the analysis. That's why I'm not discussing much the results, but I wanted to give you a sense of what we're doing. And this helped us in mapping the fields, in identifying the major stakeholders, and then together with the advisory board of this in this project, we have basically created a list of relevant stakeholders. And thanks to this conference, actually, we have enlarged this list with some of your names, so you will hear from us. And the idea is to conduct interviews with stakeholders, exploring their approaches, conceptualization of sustainability, motivating values, the methods used, and their views on the challenges ahead. So at the moment, we only conducted some preliminary interviews and some exploratory interviews, really. So we have talked to people, for example, for the SDIA, which is like the Sustainable Digital Infrastructure Association, the DEFRA department, which is the the UK Environmental Department, and they are developing like guidelines to reduce the environmental impacts of the digital technology used within the government. Same with NHS Digital, they are also like developing like several tools in this context. So what emerged in these like first interviews was that basically people feel that there is like a responsibility gap in this area. Not only they point out that guidelines are missing, that there is no direction from public bodies, there are no common standards, and that these specific issues and that basically there are no standards on this specific issue to determine what good practices are. But they also say that in some cases, for example, it is unclear who has the responsibility to do what. So people working in the digital infrastructure sector feel that they have the burden of the responsibility of addressing emissions of the infrastructures, while people working in digital service providers are somehow off the hook. This is not big news. Many people actually in the conference have been talking about the responsibility gap. What is interesting is that stakeholders have the same feeling. And I believe that when talking about this, in a way, we need to think about what is not only about how stakeholders feel, and also saying this kind of be like an empirical question, but also like asking the conceptual question about what do we mean by responsibility in this context? How do we understand and use this concept? And the normative question about who should take responsibility and how. So I think these questions are all interrelated, and I'll just jump very quickly here, because we have been talking a lot about the issues of leaving the responsibilities with the public sector, with the private sector, and we've talked about the accountability and the need for the public sector and public institutions to actually give some direction in this field. But we've also talked about the limitations of putting as much as it is important to raise awareness, the individual's awareness and citizens' awareness of this issue, because we have seen how important it is in all kind of environmental movements. But we also realize that individuals act in an ecosystem, and in a way we can't expect them to bear all the burden of responsibility. So again, we see, like, I just want to show like how some of these observations and some of these empirical aspects are linked with what we then kind of come up with like normative conclusions. One point or like provocation I would like to end with is that I think that what is important here, and again, is something that I've heard, for example, like in Lotte's presentation yesterday, like in the question in the question session, was that when we think about responsibility, very often the image that most commonly comes to our mind is this one that you see on the slide, and it's about blaming somebody for some harm that they've produced on others and asking them to pay. So this is responsibility as understood in the most traditional liability model. And this is the prominent legal model of responsibility, and that is used when thinking about technology-related harms. But does it work when thinking about responsibility for environmental impacts of big data, AI, and digital technologies? So my hunch, and I think like some other people yesterday were going in that direction, is that it doesn't. And this is something that has, and it's something, it doesn't because in this context, we often deal with diffuse effects where it is very difficult to establish causal effect links between like cause and effect, and between digital technology, the use, and the environmental impact. And when we think about sustainability, we should not only look back, but we should also be able to look forward. In way to like preventing harms and not only compensating for them. And in a way, kind of the liability notion does not always allow for this kind of prospective look. And finally, we are talking about a field where there are like many actors, like yesterday we were talking about like the many hands problem, and where we have public policymakers, infrastructure industry, IT service providers, users of digital services and infrastructures, and even the users we can think about end users like us, or like people using the final services, but also the provider of the social services. So one question that I think is important to ask is whether and how a model of collective action can help in this context. And I leave it here in the sense that I do believe that in a way, this kind of conceptual also work and thinking about how philosophical perspective can be implemented in practice can really help us in this context. So I just want to point out that I think this is it is important to change our way of thinking about this thing, because I'm a bit less optimistic than Daniela, who spoke before me, about cost benefits analysis, and I can say more about that if anyone is interested. But I think in a way they bring us to think about the question as a yes/no question, and in a context where it's very hard to quantify costs and benefits. And in a context, as somebody also pointed out yesterday, costs and benefits are not very equally shared. And these are like images just to show how the costs and benefits of AI and the costs and benefits, like issues of environmental justice come up in this field. And I'll just leave it here. But when we talk about like cost benefits analysis, then we have to think about the cost for whom and and in which context. So let me just conclude by saying I heard that there's like actually wonderful work being done in Germany on this. We are also like very much in touch with the UK, also like at the government and more like practice level. So I really hope that this conference will help us actually in joining forces, since we've been talking about synergies. And do please visit the website and get in touch if you're interested, and hopefully we can move together from here. Thank you, and sorry for going slightly over time.
No worries, I understand. Thank you, Federica. Thank you for your talk. Really nice to see you. Also great that you point out that the UK is doing so much in this space, because yesterday now both, I think on each day that we've had, I've been talking about the German initiatives because I'm new here, and so I'm learning about them as they come up. So another benefit of doing the conference is really learning what's happening in different countries, so that we can, I don't know. It's probably a good competition if we're all trying to be as sustainable as possible. I feel like there's nothing wrong with that, but
There's a competition, right? I think
yeah,
it's really a matter of joining forces. Absolutely,
yeah, for sure.
in a
So
context where actually countries are moving us apart. So I
yeah,
think it's good.
I know. Ugh. Okay, so I have a bunch of questions for you, a variety of questions. The first one, which I'm also actually really interested in, especially knowing your previous work, what do you think is the role of the ethicist in this space, right? So we're talking about sustainability. You are a philosopher and an ethicist. What role does the ethicist have to play in this space?
Thank you. Well, I do think that ethicists can play the role of trying to explore these underlying values and bring clarity in the concepts that we're using, in the values that we're using, and showing what the conflicts among between these values are. And also, I think they have the duty to come up with practical solutions. And I'm saying it because when for example, where I'm looking at this issue of the role of collective responsibility and how we can bringing this, and it's not new because it is something that it's done in the environmental context, but how does it apply especially to issues of digital sustainability? And one thing that I feel I need to do all the time is like thinking about how, what does it mean practically? I
Yeah.
cannot just like come up with a good model, but also how does it apply? So I think it's a role that they can play in helping building like this governance model, but also it's a duty to try to think practically about how to apply these views and these concepts and these values.
That's great. So I have another question that touches on the problem of many hands that you were just touching on at the end, and we did talk about that yesterday in one of the Q&As. So the question is whether we are working with a backward or a forward-looking sense of responsibility. It seems in such complex systems, we will often face the problem of many hands. Do you have any ideas about dealing with this?
Yeah. No, this is exactly when I'm thinking about we do need to take this into account in our system, and we cannot we need to think about how all these different stakeholders have different type of responsibilities, and what type of responsibilities and how they can enact them. So I don't have an answer yet to that, but I think this is part of the problem. This is why we can't just rely on a liability model. And the question is, can we integrate like two models where we also think about, this diffused effect and this forward-looking way of thinking about responsibilities. So I'm thinking of it. Hopefully, I can give you a better answer, a more straightforward answer. But it is definitely something that needs to be. It's not just a problem that may make us like fall back into liability model. I think it's a problem that we need to address in that sense.
Yeah. So I have another question for you. Seeing as you presented so many different projects that you're working on, what do you think is the most critical issue that we are facing in this conversation of sustainability and AI, or sustainability and digital technologies in general?
So yeah, I was expecting this question. I'm joking. No, no. As I said, I think thinking about who has the responsibility for what is what I was saying, and in a way, is a critical issue, and it is not easy in a sense because of some of the challenges. I mean, this I was just discussing now, but I think, and this is something that actually has come up to me while being at this conference, is that one challenge. I mean, been talking about awareness, been talking about education, but one thing that I noticed is that we are all coming in this field from different backgrounds, from different spheres of knowledge, from different disciplines, but with different interests. And just like in a couple of hours, there will be another workshop held by the University of Cambridge on these very topics. And I what I want to say is that I think it is one of the challenges is to actually bring people together and create a space for communicating and like creating like the words and the language where we can communicate and we can bring and like knowledge and ideas together. So I think because there is so much going on, and this conference and these days like really reinforced my idea that this is happening. But then the question is how we work together and how we
Yeah.
we go from there. So in that sense, yes, the conference and your work is like great way forward in this direction.
I think just picking up on your point, what also adds to the complexity of how do we get people to work together in this collaborative sense, we've also sort of fostered in academia this really competitive model, that you have to have these new ideas, you're competing for grants, so it seems like there's almost forces working against us. And yet we need to sort of move beyond that, move forward, and still maintain this this motivation to collaborate with each other, even though the outside forces are not making that easier. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, no, absolutely, absolutely. But that's it's a very practical field, right? Where it's not just about universities and
Yeah.
academic working on it. It's also about like practitioners, and it's also about like policymakers, and we saw all this. Anyway, I don't know. I mean, especially in this field, is the mostly the periods in my academic career where I've been like more collaborative, and I've worked a lot with like colleagues, and I've got really the most out of it in terms of kind of recognition, and in terms of like real work that has been done. So I think this is part of when I think about, okay, we need to think about new ways of thinking about responsibilities, new way of thinking about like economic models in this context. I think it is also a way of thinking about like what is the type of academia, what is the type of collaboration academia that we want, and just
Yeah.
go for it.
Yeah, nice. Thank you. Well, I'd love to keep asking you questions for the rest of the day, but 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 we need
It's
to move
lovely
on.
to have the conversation, but we'll have it over the weekend. And thank you so much
Yeah, sounds
for having
good.
me.
Thank you for being here, Feta. Really nice to
Thank
see
you.
you again. Okay,
Thank you.
bye.
Bye.
Now, actually, we will end up moving into an early lunch break, which is why I went a couple of minutes over with Federica, because Pac unfortunately has had to drop out for personal reasons. So we won't have Pac's contribution with us today, but I do know that he has been, working on a paper where he's talking about Confucianism and the role that this lens or this way of thinking can shed light on some new issues and new ways of evaluating artificial intelligence as a technology. And so these are works in progress, some of which are already published. So I'm sure that we can also learn more about what he would be saying through his already published and his up and coming publications. So at this moment, then, I say we have an extra 25 minutes added to our day. Woohoo! So enjoy the lunch break, and we will see you back here at 1 o'clock to continue on with this paper session. Thank you very much, and we'll see you later.